Welcome. We're so sorry not to be able to entertain you in person in the historic village of Repton, but in these COVID times, we're delighted that you're joining us online for the Repton Literary Festival 2020, A Year on the Cloud. This will be a series of discussions titled Books That Shaped Me. My name's Joanna Hans, and our very first guest to A Year on the Cloud is Sophie Draper, writer, storyteller, winner of the Bath Novel Award and the York Festival of Writing Friday Night Live Award. That was in 2017 for her first novel, Cuckoo.
Cuckoo by Sophie Draper. Prologue. I am floating between two worlds, the living and the dead. As I lie here in my hospital bed, the faces shimmer above, voices distant and unfamiliar. Slowly I return. I cannot move. I am a doll placed exactly as they choose. They're quite unaware that I'm awake, that I can see and hear. The machines, the trolleys on their wheels, the tubes wriggling from body to bed, the clicks and beeps that mark each breath, each beat a ticking clock. Each sigh discharged as if my last. Today I can see the table. Someone places a small painting beside me. It shows a boy. He sits on a grave under a tree, ivy coiled around his feet. He holds a pear drum. I know this object. Not a drum, but something else. The shape appalls me. A large pear-shaped box, too big for the boy's lap. The strings that stretch across, the handle at one end, the strange creatures painted on the side. An instrument. It plays the devil's music. My heart jolts, leaping against my ribs, hammering like a condemned man. The machines fill my lungs with air. I feel my chest expand, stretching until it is so taut I think my body will burst. But no, the machines deflate. Once more I hear their steady beat. I watch the drip, drip of the feed that punctures my arm, and my consciousness fades away. When I wake, I hear hushed tones. Regret. They're talking about me. My mind is surging, willing myself to move, to make one small sign that I'm alive. But the feeling dissipates like smoke in a chimney. I watch the boy. He winds the handle on the pear drum, round and around. The hours turn into days, then weeks, time sliding between each heartbeat. Slowly, memory returns. When I see the sky, it's white or grey, reflections of the room bouncing off the window glass, and black. Sometimes against the grey is the tiniest streak of black, one small bird buffeted by an invisible wind. As I lie in this bed, they all think I am as good as dead. Except I am not dead. Not yet. How disappointed they must be.
Cuckoo was swiftly followed by Magpie. Both are excellent reads of the genre psychological suspense, although I'm not fond of pigeonholing books because I think they're either well written or we don't bother, and yours are well written. Sophie, welcome to the Books That Shaped Me. Can you hear me?
Thank you, it's lovely to be here.
That's lovely. Well, we're going to show the discussion that we had earlier in a moment. after which we'll take questions from our audience. The details of how they do that are on the website. So let's cue our discussion. Good evening, Sophie. Thank you very much for joining us tonight and coming to talk about the books that shaped me. Now, what I really want to ask you is your relationship with books as a young child.
I probably have to confess at this point that my family is an academic family. So I was brought up in a household full of books. And my father, he's 92, in fact, he was 92 on Saturday, he is a retired professor of English. So I had a mountain of books. We moved to Scotland in Aberdeen when I was about 9. And we moved to this old Victorian flat, and there was sort of the children's bedrooms, our bedrooms were up at the top floor in these small attic spaces. But the hallway was huge. It was absolutely mammoth. And my father had got it lined with bookcases, and the stairwell was filled with copies of the encyclopedia. So I spent most of my time, not in my bedroom, but actually in the hallway, spread out with my toys and my books and all my favourite things. And I would just sit there and browse the books, I guess. And I'm pretty sure that must have ingrained in me a love of books and writing.
And did your father read to you as a child?
He did, yes. We had various things. But the thing that I remember the most was actually that he used to read. Now, this might make you laugh, but my father used to read me Paradise Lost.
Right, okay. When we were being read Winnie the
Which
Pooh.
might seem quite a heavy text for an 11-year-old. But my dad would sit on the end of the bed and I haven't got a copy with me, which is such a shame, but he would read me all the different books of, there's several books in Paradise Lost, and he'd ham up all the characters. So I'd get the devil kind of completely off the wall. And it was just fantastic. He had a way of expressing the language and explaining words and getting me into the words, even if I didn't quite know what they were, what the references were. He kind of made it understandable, and he made it fun. So, thanks to Dad for that.
I think it's so important to keep reading to children, even though they can then read for themselves.
Oh, yeah, I've got 3 boys, and I really enjoyed that time in the evenings when we got to sit down and read a book. And of course, they got all my favourites. So they got Roald Dahl and T.S. Eliot, and trying to think what else. We did quite a bit of poetry, actually, because I like the rhythm and the rhyme in stories.
Carrying on from nursery rhymes. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. So, what was the first significant book that you chose for yourself?
What was on my list? If I can find it. Here's an old favourite, I think, for a lot of people.
Cue, yes.
Tolkien.
I'm glad you haven't changed your mind.
Yeah, so when I was 17, because when you go to Scotland, you can leave after your 5th year in secondary school. So I left school at 17. And before I went on to university, I had a summer working as an au pair in Germany. And it was my first time I'd ever gone overseas, let alone on my own. And I remember suddenly arriving in this house it was in Goslar, which is quite near the border of East Germany, and near the Harz Mountains, and working for a family looking after their 2 children. And in my spare time, I was a bit kind of lost. I didn't know anybody. I actually didn't speak any German when I got there, just a few bits of grammar, that's all. I think I probably occupied myself by reading. And there was only one book I'd managed to get into my bookcase, and it was the biggest, fattest book I could find. And it was a copy, not this one, but it was a copy of Lord of the Rings. And I remember it took me a while to get into it, but once I got beyond about page 50, I was absolutely sucked in. I loved all the myths within myths and the different strands of the story and the sort of fascinating fantasy characters. And yeah, it still stays with me. I still remember, I had that sort of, I think everyone identifies with the main character of The Hobbit, don't they? And the sort of his dilemmas that he faces. And I just loved it. It was that whole kind of fantasy world. I got sucked into it. I disappeared in my head in this story, and I stopped being lonely. So it was fantastic. And it was the year that Princess Diana and Prince Charles got married. So I remember it for that reason as well. That and Lord of the Rings.
You mentioned there fantasy, myth and legend. I know the other part of your life is being a storyteller. Was that a big influence there to tell your stories?
Well, yes, it must have been. I think my dad used to tell me a lot about the sort of references that you get in classic literature, and particularly to Roman and Greek myths. And I used to love all that stuff, and sort of Helen and Troy and the big battles, and Medusa and the head with the snakes for hair and all that stuff. And I just loved it. I think it was great. And I guess that's probably why this appealed to me. But it certainly got me interested in folklore and myths and legends. And I now work as an oral storyteller. So that means I tell stories to all ages, from little ones to grown-ups, in schools and in clubs and tourist attractions, historic homes. And it's all based on a repertoire of traditional stories. And I have a particular interest in British folklore, in fact. So I know quite a lot about English, Welsh, Scottish folklore. And it's amazing how it seeps into everything. You know, lots of books make little references without even kind of being aware of it. You'll see something seep in. And of course, recently has been quite a trend for sort of the Greek and Roman myths, like, you know, stories of Medusa and Circe and so on. So it's there, it's in our bones, all of us, you know, and it's one of the things I love about oral storytelling is you'll tell a story and it will resonate. People recognize things, even if they're not quite sure where they heard it or how they came across it. And then they'll sit and they'll listen. And sometimes people surprise themselves with just sitting and listening. It's a nice thing to do. And yeah, when you get people in the zone, you can kind of take them somewhere where, you know, somewhere romantic or thrilling or scary or spooky. And, you know, it's a little bit of magic, I think.
So having left Germany, your next choice is quite a dark book. The Road
right, this would be. Would this be this one?
That would be that one. And I believe we have a short excerpt that you've read for us.
The Road by Cormac McCarthy. They followed him a good ways, but at his pace they were losing the day, and finally he just sat in the road and did not get up again. The boy hung on to his father's coat. No one spoke. He was as burnt-looking as the country, his clothing scorched and black. One of his eyes was burnt shut, and his hair was but a nitty wig of ash upon his blackened skull. As they passed, he looked down, as if he'd done something wrong. His shoes were bound up with wire and coated with road tar, and he sat there in silence, bent over in his rags. The boy kept looking back. "Papa?" he whispered. "What is wrong with the man?" "He's been struck by lightning." "Can't we help him? Papa?" "No, we can't help him." The boy kept pulling at his coat. "Papa," he said. "Stop it." "Can't we help him, Papa?" "No, we can't help him. There's nothing to be done for him."
So, Sophie, that's a very lyrical piece. Can you tell me how that's influenced you?
I remember reading The Road in one fell swoop. I'd started it late at night. This was when my youngest was only about, I think he was only about 6 months old or something. And I just picked this book up because I couldn't sleep. And then I got drawn into it. It's so beautifully written, and it is a dark book. It's a post-apocalyptic horror novel, really. But it's not written like that. It's written like a piece of poetry, and you get drawn into this beautiful relationship between the father and his son. And as you start to realise the landscape that they're walking through, this awful landscape with terrible things happening, it's this relationship between the father and son just shines through like a beacon of light. It's so beautifully done. I ended up reading it right through till 4 a.m, despite the fact I knew I had a school run to do the following day, and it just absolutely struck me as a beautiful piece of writing. And at that point, I wasn't really writing myself, but I just remember thinking that if I could get anything like close to that, writing something like that, that would make me happy.
Well,
so I think it was the start of me thinking about writing.
I'll interrupt you there, because that sense of lyricism and place shows particularly in your book Magpie, which is also about relationships between a child and its parents.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because I don't think I'd quite twigged that there's actually some similarity, not like in terms of the writing is very different, but I certainly was interested in exploring relationships with Magpie. It's really about a marriage that falls apart and the difficulties both the mother and the father have with their teenage son who has various problems. And I kind of tell it in reverse. I wanted to kind of let it unfold for people to slowly realize what was really going on. And yeah, I have 3 sons. I as they've grown older, I've learned how to be a parent, and I think part of that went into the book, trying to sort of the difficulties that you have coping with the situation, but also trying to be yourself, and that role that women get to when they get to a certain age and their children start to grow up and they realize that their life has gone by and there's things that they want to do for themselves and not just be a parent. So all of that kind of fed into it. And it was inspired very much by the valley where I live. So I live in rural Derbyshire, in a rather beautiful little valley off the side area of one of the main roads northwest of Derby. And it's a very quiet valley. It's got a few houses dotted around. It's got a village. We live just outside the village. And then there's another village down this sort of side valley, which when I first moved here was half empty. Long story, but it belonged to an old estate. And I used to walk around the block, and I'd see these houses and think, oh, this is amazing. There was a lovely old Georgian building and little cottages and a farm, and they just looked as if they'd been locked in time. And it started to make me think, and I think a lot of that has gone into the book. And yeah, I think setting does inspire me. It gives me ideas. The myths in an area belong to the landscape, and that inspires me as well. So yeah, it's the same with the book I'm working on at the moment. I've found a particular location that's really interesting, and then I've looked at all the myths and legends, and that's all gone into the story. So
I'm going to stop you there, Sophie, and bring you to your next choice, which is Lullaby by Leila Slimani, a French writer, and you've done us a little reading from that.
Lullaby by Leila Slimani. Miriam is about to open the fridge when she sees it, there in the middle of the little table where the children and their nanny eat. A chicken carcass sits on a plate. A glistening carcass without the smallest scrap of flesh hanging from its bones, not the faintest trace of meat. It looks as if it's been gnawed clean by a vulture or a stubborn, meticulous insect. Some kind of repulsive animal, anyway. She stares at the brown skeleton, its round spine, its sharp bones, its smooth vertebrae. Its thighs have been torn off, but its twisted little wings are still there, the joints distended close to breaking point. The shiny yellow cartilage resembles dried pus. Through the holes between the small bones, Miriam sees the empty insides of the thorax, dark and bloodless. No meat remains, no organs, nothing on this skeleton that could rot. And yet it seems to Miriam that it is a putrescent carcass, a vile corpse that is festering and decaying before her eyes, here in the kitchen. She is sure of it. She threw away that chicken this morning. The meat was no longer edible. She didn't want her children to get ill from eating it. She remembers clearly how she shook the plate over the bin bag and how the creature fell, covered in gelatinous fat. It landed with a wet thud at the bottom of the bin, and Miriam said, "Ugh, That smell, so early in the morning, made her feel sick. Miriam moves closer to the creature, but she doesn't dare touch it. Louise can't have done this by mistake or out of forgetfulness, and certainly not as a joke. No, the carcass smells of washing liquid and sweet almond. Louise washed it in the sink. She cleaned it and put it there as an act of vengeance, like a baleful totem.
That was a particularly unpleasant part of the book that you read to us there, Sophie. But I felt this book was almost the opposite of your writing, because this we knew what had happened and then we discover why, whereas you disclose slowly and leave some ambiguity.
Yes, that's a very interesting comment. People have different ways of telling a story, don't they? And a lot of crime novels, it's all about what happened and who did it. And I think one of the things that is interesting about this book is she decides to tell you who did it right from the start and then explain why. And one of the clever things she does is she then draws you into her life and her background and what's happened to her as a young woman and even as a child, until by the time you get to the end, you utterly sympathise with her, despite the monstrous thing that she's done, and which I think is very clever. And there is some beautiful writing in it. But with Cuckoo, I was deliberately slightly ambiguous at the end. I had a bit of fun with that, and there's a bit of a twist as well. So that's one of the things I enjoy, is coming up with a twist and kind of, if you like, almost deceiving the reader. And both Magpie and Cuckoo do that. I hope in an enjoyable way.
Oh yes, I will vouch for that. And so when you sort of start writing, you're thinking of a book. What sort of background reading do you do? Because I think this brings us on to your next choice.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that we talked about setting, didn't we? And my current work in progress, which has a working title of Cat and Mouse, it may not end up being called that, but that's what it is at the moment, is actually set in on the edge of Derbyshire and Staffordshire, where there's a gorge called Lud's Church. And Lud's Church is the setting for a medieval poem. I studied medieval history at university, so this was something I was aware of a long time ago. And this is what I had to read when I was thinking about that story. This is a copy of Gawain and the Green Knight, which is this lovely sort of narrative poem, author unknown, as they often were in medieval times. And it's just this beautiful, it's actually an Arthurian myth, a legend of the Green Knight who challenges Arthur to chop his head off. And Gawain steps forward and offers to do it for him, with a bit of a twist to it. And it's all apparently set in Lud's Church. They can track the journey that the characters go on, and they end up travelling through Wales into Derbyshire, and that's where it is. And I thought, this is a fantastic dilemma tale. And that then inspired my current work in progress. So I can't say much more without giving away the story too much. But yeah, that was essential reading for my current work.
Excellent. And we've talked about several books that have influenced you, but do you have a favourite book that you would present to your younger self?
Well, there's one book which I absolutely adore, and throughout whatever age you are, I think it would appeal to anybody. And I would certainly hand this down to my children and their children if I could. I don't know if you can see, there's no title on there, but it is T.S. Eliot's old book. What's it called? I'll get the title right.
No. Old Possum's Book.
Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. So it's the book that the musical Cats is based on, but this is nothing like the musical. The poetry in here is so full of life, full of joy and mischief and fun and a bit of drama too. I think this is the perfect book. If I got shut away on an island or I had to go into purgatory and I'd got to take one book with me to keep me company, this would be it.
So I believe, Sophie, you've done a little reading of one of them, and I believe it is McCavity the Mystery Cat.
Indeed,
which
yes.
rather fits in with your psychological... Mysteries? No, they're not mysteries, are they? Would you put yourself into a genre of writing?
I'm not really classic thriller, or there is definitely a psychological twist going on with all the work that I've done so far. I guess I'd describe myself as psychological suspense. So there's a mystery and there's a twist and a psychological element to it. And sometimes things get a bit dodgy for the main characters. Sometimes it's to do with relationships and a little bit more, but definitely a bit of suspense in there, yeah.
Let's hear Macavity the Mystery Cat.
Macavity the Mystery Cat, from T.S. Eliot's Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. Macavity's a mystery cat. He's called the Hidden Paw, for he's the master criminal who can defy the law. He's the bafflement of Scotland Yard, the flying squad's despair, for when they reach the scene of crime, Macavity's not there. Macavity, Macavity, there's no one like Macavity. He's broken every human law, he breaks the law of gravity. His powers of levitation would make a fakir stare, and when you reach the scene of the crime, Macavity's not there. You may seek him in the basement, you may look him up in the air, but I tell you once and once again, Macavity's not there. Macavity's a ginger cat. He's very tall and thin. You would know him if you saw him, for his eyes are sunken in. His brow is deeply lined with thought, his head is highly domed, his coat is dusty from neglect, his whiskers are uncombed. He sways his head from side to side with movements like a snake, and when you think he's half asleep, he's always wide awake. Macavity, Macavity, there's no one like Macavity, for he's a fiend in feline shape, a monster of depravity. You may meet him in the by-street, you may see him in the square, but when a crime's discovered, then Macavity's not there. He's outwardly respectable. They say he cheats at cards, and his footprints are not found in any file of Scotland Yards. And when the larder's looted, or the jewel case is rifled, or when the milk is missing, or another peak's been stifled, or the greenhouse glass is broken and the trellis past repair, aye, there's the wonder of the thing, Macavity's not there. And when the Foreign Office find a treaty's gone astray, or the Admiralty loses some plans and drawings by the way, there may be a scrap of paper in the hall or on the stair, but it's useless to investigate, Macavity's not there. And when the loss has been disclosed, the Secret Service say it must have been Macavity, but he's a mile away. You'll be sure to find him resting or licking of his thumbs, or engaged in doing complicated long division sums. Macavity, Macavity, there's no one like Macavity. There never was a cat of such deceitfulness and suavity. He always has an alibi, and one or two to spare. At whatever time the deed took place, Macavity wasn't there. And they say that all the cats whose wicked deeds are widely known, I might mention Mungo Jerry, I might mention Griddlebone, are nothing more than agents for the cat who all the time just controls their operations, the Napoleon of crime.
I'm delighted you chose that. It's one of my favourites. And I'm sure with 3 boys, I had 4 children, it was always Mr. Nobody in my household. And now, Sophie, I know you mentioned your work in progress earlier on, for which you'd read Gawain and the Green Knight, but I believe you've also got a children's story in progress. Are you going to change to becoming a children's writer?
Well, I just like telling stories. It doesn't necessarily matter what age for.
I think we've realised that.
This was actually a novel it was the first novel I started on about 5 or 6 years ago. And it didn't work out for various reasons. And then we moved house and I started writing what became Cuckoo. But after having done Cuckoo and Magpie and now my 3rd book, I hope, learnt quite a bit. And I picked up Ravenstones again when I had to send my current work back to my agent so that she could look at it and edit it. So I'm currently in that sort of in-between stage of waiting for her to come back to me. And I picked up Ravenstones, that's what it's called at the moment, the Ravenstones again. And I was been working on it today actually, and I was thinking I really enjoy this story. I think it deserves another chance. So we'll see. I don't know what will happen to it, but we'll see.
Well, that's something for us all to look forward to. Sophie, I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you, and I know you're now going to answer questions from our live audience. rlf@scorpioneventsolutions.co.uk. That's RLF, Repton Literary Festival, at Scorpion, the insect that stings, Event Solutions, all one word.co.uk. Now, in the meantime, Sophie, thank you for that. I'd almost forgotten what we'd talked about. That was, and I think we have questions coming in now. Thank you very much, Nick. Sophie, do you belong to a community of writers, and who do you share your work with? Or is that Rob, who we saw in the background very early on, lighting your fire? I'm very jealous.
Rob does get regular updates. But I did several writers' courses a few years ago, and they're brilliant for not just for sort of learning some of the technical aspects of writing, but just for meeting people. And I met some really lovely people that I've kept in touch with over the few years since. And I suppose out of that emerged kind of two groups. So there's one group that I sort of keep in touch with by telephone or meet up with for coffee and stuff like that. And then there's another group, a smaller group of writers where there was sort of 4 or 5 of us who were quite serious about getting published, not just writing. And that group kind of emerged into what we fondly call the Doomsbury group. And that includes writers like Ros Watkins and Joe Jakeman and Fran Doricott, and another writer called Lou Travat. And we've all kept in touch, and we've met up, we've shared writing, we chat on WhatsApp, and it's been really lovely to kind of learn from each other's experiences of getting published and the sort of pitfalls and pleasures of seeing each other's work getting published. So yeah, it's really rewarding to get to know people and motivating, because when you're working at home all day, you get lonely. So it's lovely to talk to other writers.
I think anything that you do, if you belong to a group, it's encouraging for you. I've got another question for you, Sophie, from Jane Bettany. I know that Sophie is a traditional storyteller as well as being a novelist, and I wonder if she could talk a little about the difference or even similarities between creating stories that are going to be delivered orally or through performance compared to writing short stories or novels for readers. That's a long question. Did you get the bones of it?
Though.
It's a good, interesting.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Jane. I do think that my oral storytelling has informed what I do as a writer. It's very different writing to telling a story. Telling a story, you have to be very to the point. You can't waffle on with long descriptions, and the pace and what happens in the story is really important. And I think what I enjoy about the writing I've done so far is hopefully coming up with stories which twist and turn and have a degree of focus in terms of the plot. So, yeah, I think telling stories teaches you, when you work with an audience, you immediately see how the audience respond, and that feedback informs what you do, how you carry on telling the story. And I think when I write, I kind of had that in my head. I kind of try to think, how would people react to these words, or what would they want to know next? What would tease them? What would make them want to turn the page? And I hope at least that kind of feeds in. Certainly with Cuckoo, there were lots of folk tales that got woven in. And so my knowledge of fairy tales fed into that as well.
I did enjoy that about Cuckoo. and almost missed it in Magpie. And we have a very interesting question here from Melissa Cook. How has your writing style evolved? Or are you aware of it evolving?
Hi, Melissa. That's a great question. I'm not sure I can answer it really. I think it's quite difficult to judge that for myself. But I think I'm more aware technically of kind of the different elements of plotting, your kind of planning. I think a lot of people start off writing and just kind of enjoy the story and get just launch into it and dive in. And sometimes they'll have an idea of where it's going, and sometimes they won't. And certainly I think I was like that to start off with Cuckoo. And then I've learned from working with my agent and with my editor that kind of what they look for, how they, and actually when you're working to a deadline, that changes things as well, because you don't have so much time. So it does focus. And I think as I've got more experience with writing, I plan a lot more. But with every book I've written, I've known exactly where it's going to end. And that kind of comes from storytelling, because when you tell a story, you know where you're heading for, and you've got a time frame in mind as well. So that really focuses you. And I think as long as you know where you're heading for, you can tell that story, whether it's writing or spoken. I think probably I've got more disciplined. I sit down now and I work from 9 to whenever I have to pick up the children from school, sometimes beyond that. And I do treat it very much as a thing that I do. So especially now with lockdown, I've not been storytelling so much. So the writing's taken over, and I actually really love that. So yeah, I think when you work with deadlines and a publishing firm, that really focuses the mind a bit.
I'm glad you said that, because it leads me to a question that I was going to ask you. Sophie, can you tell us, do you have a daily regime with your writing? Do you sort of treat it as a daily job that you write from a certain time?
Oh, definitely. I had to kind of remind the rest of the family, actually, that I do have a job and it's not a hobby. Sorry. But yeah, I have a room at the back of the house that is, I do a lot of reading here, but it's also where I do my work. And it's really nice to have a space that you kind of think, okay, this is an office, I have to work. And that kind of gets you in the zone. I drop off my youngest at school first thing in the morning. I get myself some breakfast. I sit down. I try and stoke the fire. It's not working very well at the moment, and I make myself do it. I've got 2 huge whiteboards. You can't see them, but I've got 2 huge whiteboards on the wall, and I'm constantly jotting ideas and scribbling and thinking and using them to focus my thoughts. And I do treat it as a job. I'm lucky that I'm able to do it full time at the moment. I kind of say lucky because lockdown has had a terrible impact on everybody. But for storytellers, the work is gone because you can't visit schools, you can't visit tourist attractions. So the bad side is that I haven't been able to earn from that. But the good side has been I've been able to work full time on writing. So it is a job. I don't want to say it feels like a job. It is a job.
I've got 2 very interesting questions here. One you did sort of touch on in our discussion. It's from Leslie Reynolds. What does Sophie think of Lud's Church, and was she able to identify the geography with Gawain in the Green Knight? Were you able to visit that through lockdown?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to remember when we went. Ros, I mentioned Ros, who's a fellow author. Ros and I both went together to go and visit Lud's Church. I can't remember when it was. It was earlier this year anyway. And I had been before a long time ago, but actually being there makes it much more real. It's the most fantastic setting. It's a gorge. It's almost like the ground has been split open. And down there in the gorge, it's very green and damp and very atmospheric. The geography from the poem, there's been a few sort of academic discussions about that, but mainly they try and track the journey from wherever King Arthur's castle was assumed to be, somewhere in Wales or maybe even in Cornwall, through the sort of borderlands of Wales and across Cheshire, Staffordshire, to Lud's Church. There are different theories, but the most popular one is Lud's Church is the setting. And it's obviously not a church. It's a rocky cavern, But yeah, there's actually a place inside the gorge where there's some rocks, and they really look like a human face with a craggy nose and massive eyebrows with these green plants growing on them, and it looks amazing, and it's the perfect setting for what happens in Cat and Mouse. So yeah, I hope that comes across.
You're whetting our appetite. I've got another good question here, and it may be our winding up question. You've talked a lot about parenting and becoming a person in your own right after raising children. If you had a recommendation for other women just emerging from this, what would it be? That's from Melissa.
Oh, hi, Melissa. I love that question. Oh gosh, it's parenthood is so overwhelming. You know, when you first have a baby and suddenly you've got to look after this tiny thing, it's terrifying, and it can be quite overwhelming. I think anything that you can do that's for yourself, that is creative and productive, is you kind of try to balance, don't you? This responsibility for the children that you're looking after, to still being yourself. When I go into something, I dive into it full-hearted. I think I did do that. But I think I would recommend that try to maintain your own interests. Don't let it suck you in. Don't let it drag you down if that can happen. Writing was great for me as a way of expression. Storytelling was that too, being able to vocalize and meet other people and socialize was brilliant. So all of that kind of drew me down the right path of writing. So yeah, my advice would be make time for yourself. You matter. Your skill set is still there. You're still a human being with fantastic talents and skills. Don't let that be lost in looking after children. Children is lovely, and but it's, you know, there's lots of different elements to being a person. So yeah, let it all flourish.
I've just been told over there, not in my ear, that we can keep going for a little while longer. So I've got a question here. From Ros Watkins. This is really interesting. What do you find most enjoyable and least enjoyable about the writing process?
Trust you, Ros, to come up with a difficult question. Most enjoyable.
Is Ros from your writing group?
It is, yes. Hi, Ros. The thing I most enjoy about writing is, it's a bit like storytelling, really. I love feedback from the audience. So somebody gets in touch with me and says what they enjoyed about the book. That really makes my day, yeah. And it's lovely to have a book being published as well. You know, it's a bit of a thrill. You know, I still got, you know, you probably see them on my shelf, but there they are. It's just, you know, I touch them every now and again and stroke them. But yeah, that's nice. And the most difficult thing about being published, it's not an easy way to make a living. You know, don't wish to be published because you think it's going to make you into a millionaire overnight. It's not going to happen. I mean, my books have done all right. I'm quite proud of that. But, you know, it is a long process. Learning how to write a book and then trying to get published is hard work. There's a lot of gatekeepers, and submissions are tough. Rejection is tough. It's a bit of a roller coaster. But that's kind of what makes it exciting as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's not an easy life to follow, but I can't resist writing. I love writing, so I'm not going to stop writing anytime soon, even if I don't do very well.
Well, I think that's lovely. I think we can probably say, Sophie, that most of the people, or all of the people who have signed in to watch tonight and listen, they love reading. And I hope some of them may not be aware of your work, and I hope that will encourage them to go and find your books and read them and enjoy them as much as I do. I will say that when I was first introduced and I was going to have to talk to you, and they said, psychological thriller, and I thought, that's not me. But I loved them, and that's a genuine comment, and I think I can safely say thank you from everybody who's listened and from all the people who have organised this event. I want to thank everybody backstage, so to speak, and hope that you will all join us again for more of these events. All the books that have been mentioned will be listed on the Repton Literary Festival website, so that if you think, oh, I'd quite like to read that, you'll be able to find the exact name of the book. And Sophie, it's my pleasure to thank you very much for joining us. And goodbye.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely. Bye-bye.
Bye.